Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast. We just finished up talking about John Calipari and the Kentucky Wildcats going forward following their loss yesterday to Oakland. Now we are going to be getting into the remainder of the games from yesterday. We, of course, just talked at length about, I think you can call Calipari a legend. He's at least one of the biggest head coaching faces of the past decade plus. We saw another one of those coaches in action yesterday as Tom Izzo led Michigan State to a very convincing win against Mississippi State. That was the first matchup of the day. They played Mississippi State, who was ranked 21st in defense according to KenPom, but the Spartans were able to score 69 points and shoot over 50% from the field. They never trailed in this game. This was Izzo's 17th career win in March Madness as a lower-seeded team, which is the most in NCAA history. So, as we know the saying goes, January, February, Izzo, along those lines, where he is the king of March, or at least that is his reputation, and they will be advancing to play UNC in what should be a very interesting matchup. Michigan State, as it currently stands, is a 3.5-point underdog for that game. UNC, the 1 seed, blew out Wagner yesterday, so I'm very curious to see how that all plays out for them, but this was one example of the SEC having a really brutal day where they were just 1-3. Tennessee beating 15-seeded St. Peter's was the one victory for the conference yesterday. Kentucky, like we just talked about at length, them, South Carolina, and Mississippi State all lost as the higher-seeded teams. Speaking of South Carolina, they played Oregon yesterday, where we saw Jermaine Couisnard, I hope I'm pronouncing the name right, the fifth-year senior who had spent 3 seasons with South Carolina before transferring, score 40 points against his former team. Couisnard transferred after South Carolina changed coaches a couple seasons ago, and yesterday he came back to haunt them. South Carolina had a good defense this year, but Oregon just had their way en route to an 87-73 victory. One of my favorite players in college basketball, N'Faly Dante, continues his really impressive run where he scored 23 points on 7 of 9 shooting in the past 6 games, which stretches back just before the Pac-12 tournament. He is averaging 20.5 points per game and shooting 86%, which is a ridiculously efficient number for him there. He didn't miss a single shot in the Pac-12 tournament, so he is making a name for himself. He was dominant in this game as well, along with Couisnard, who, again, 40 points in his terrific performance. And Oregon is headed for another reunion of sorts. It was Couisnard in South Carolina yesterday. Now they will be taking on Creighton on Saturday, where their head coach, Dana Altman, spent 16 years as their head coach. So Oregon will continue to give us some storylines headed into the weekend. We also had a terrific game between Samford and Kansas, where Kansas escaped a late comeback win over Samford to win 93-89. The game did come with some controversy, though, down the stretch, where in the final 30 seconds, Kansas's Nicholas Timberlake broke through the Bulldogs' press coverage to attempt a dunk, and AJ Staten-McRae seemed to come back and make a tremendous chase down block. Timberlake hit the ground hard, a foul was called, but at this point, Kansas was up just one. So this was a big time call, and it was clear from the first replay that this was a clean block. Now, I will say, I also thought initially when watching it in full time, it did look like a foul. But again, clearly when you went back and looked at the replay, it was all ball, and really it was a terrible call. I hate when stuff like this happens because I hate talking about the referees. It really, when we are talking about sports, and that is a little bit what this has broken into. But it was a pivotal moment where, again, Jayhawks up one. This block, had it gone through without a call, would have been a 5-on-4 break for Samford going back down the other end with a chance to win the game. But instead, Timberlake went to the free throw line and he knocked down both the shots. The Bulldogs missed their final attempt from three, and that was the game. Again, I'm never really a fully blame the refs guy. I just feel like it's lazy. There's so much game that does happen, and I know it's unfortunate when it happens in the biggest moments, but at this point, you do also have to give the Jayhawks credit, and that's coming from me, who I've been pretty low on Kansas headed into this tournament. I didn't think they were going to have the legs and really the bodies to put up with the press that Samford was going to put on them, and I expected this to be an upset, but their offense really showed out, scoring 93 points without their leading scorer in Kevin McCullough Jr. KJ Adams was terrific again, and he led the team with 20 points in this game. He showed he was capable of carrying a good share of the offensive load during the Big 12 tournament when they faced off against Cincinnati. And yes, I know that they lost that game by 20, but when it was close early in the second half, it was because Adams was going to work, and he had 22 points in that game. So I thought that he did everything he could in that game, showed he was ready to take on a bigger role when the team needed it, and he did in this one. Hunter Dickinson was also terrific, 19 points, 20 rebounds, and 4 blocks. And credit Nicholas Timberlake, who was really struggling heading into the tournament, shooting 33% from the field in his last 5 games. Kansas was staggering at this point, granted, yes, with some injuries, but they were 1-4 during that stretch. He shot 2 for 9 during the Cincinnati game in the Big 12 tournament, but he came in, played big moments for Kansas in this game, went 5 of 8 from the field, and scored 19, icing the game with those final free throws. I'm still not ready to abandon the idea that I don't consider Kansas to be a serious contender and winning it all. Now, let me know if you disagree in the comments. I don't think they have the extra legs for it. But that being said, I will be picking Gonzaga to beat the Jayhawks on Saturday. It was an impressive win nonetheless. Maybe they'll continue to prove me wrong. We also saw a wild ending between Nevada and Dayton, where Dayton was the higher seed in this matchup, but were the betting underdogs. And they trailed 39-56 with about 7 minutes left in the game. 17-point lead for the Wolfpack, and Dayton closed on a 24-4 run to come back and win 63-60. They scored 17 consecutively at one point, and this was the first time we saw a team come back in March Madness from at least a 17-point deficit to win since Nevada actually in 2018. So we got to see a really monumental comeback here. We got to see Dayton's Deron Holmes go to work. He got going down the stretch there, including an and one that could have been one of the meanest, most vicious, and biggest in moment posters of the season. He did not get the dunk to go down, but it hit the rim, it bounced up and fell back in. That was with about 2 minutes left. he ends up hitting the free throw to give the Flyers their first lead of the second half, and the reigning Atlantic 10 Player of the Year finished with 18 points. So a great performance from him personally. I wanted to briefly touch on Arizona versus Long Beach State, which the first half was a little bit competitive. Arizona ends up blowing them out. So I'm not going to spend too much time on the game itself, but I did want to highlight the fact that this was Dan Monson's last game with Long Beach State. For those of you who don't know, he was fired right at the end of the regular season, and Long Beach State's athletic director, Bobby Smitherin, was talking to reporters before the game, and usually I try and not bring too much negativity to the show, but this guy sounded like a total loser, taking credit for the fact that Long Beach State made the tournament because he fired Monson. So again, the Beach run a losing streak to end the regular season. He was fired by Smitherin after that 5-game losing streak. He was allowed to coach through the conference tournament out of respect. The Beach ran the table in the 3 games, won their conference, got the automatic bid into March Madness, and Smitherin gave a quote before their game saying, "My belief and hope is that by doing what I did and the timing of it, they would play inspired, and that's what they did." He went on to say, "I'm not trying to pat myself on the back, but it worked," which is just one of the most irritating things to me. Really grinded my gears, the fact that he was trying to make himself to be some sort of hero for the program when you let go of a coach that's been there for 17 years. We're talking about a Long Beach State program that does not have a big-time history, and you let him go before the season even ends. Yes, the transfer portal window does open up a little bit sooner. Maybe you want to make the move quick to get the change going as soon as possible, but I thought it was dirty at the time, the way that it all played out, and I think it's even dirtier that he tried to take credit for the job that Monson and the Beach did in order to get their automatic bid. So I did just want to highlight that. Another big storyline from yesterday was the fact that 11 seeds ruled the day. We talked about Oregon beating South Carolina. This was the least surprising of the batch. Oregon was actually the betting favorites in this game, just slightly, but wasn't technically an upset in the eyes of Vegas. But we also saw Duquesne take down BYU and NC State finish off Texas Tech. And it's funny because these were the bid stealers. These were the 3 teams that likely were not going to make the tournament had they not run the table in their conference championships. And here they are. A lot of people were upset because they kept some teams out in the bubble. But you know what? At least they made it worth it for everyone by picking up their wins. So quickly on the 2 that we have not yet covered, BYU seemed like they could have been an upset candidate based on how their offense plays. They don't get to the rim very well. Over 50% of their field goal attempts this season were from beyond the 3-point line, which in terms of a game-to-game basis can be a dangerous game to play. Duquesne, led by head coach Keith Dambrett, on his retirement tour, they end up stealing the game from the Cougars by running them off of the 3-point line, and by the time that BYU really got it going more and adjusted to the style of play that they needed in order to be competitive in this game, the Dukes had built up a lead that was insurmountable. I am a little sad we don't get to see more of Jackson Robinson in the tournament. He intrigues me as an NBA prospect, a little bit on the older side, but he's a great scorer. He had 25 in this game, and they end up losing. So be it. We also saw NC State continue their little bit of a Cinderella run after winning the 5 games in 5 days in the ACC tournament, being the second team to ever do so. So we are going to see them continue, and they will be facing off against Oakland to see who the true Cinderella team is. Last note here on yesterday's games, we did see Illinois dominate Morehead State. We saw a very big-time performance from Marcus Damask, where with Illinois, they haven't really had a traditional point guard. And in this game, it was Damask stepping up with the playmaking. He finishes with a triple-double. He scored 12 points, grabbed 11 rebounds, and dished out 10 assists. So this was a really encouraging performance from Illinois as a whole. We saw Terrence Shannon Jr. continue the heater that he is on offensively, scoring 26 points in this game. And the Illini are a very interesting team going forward because they have some of the firepower necessary to take down anyone. So we are going to be headed into our third segment. But while we're on this round of 64, I will point out the fact that we have an overtime game between Northwestern and Florida Atlantic right now, and Northwestern is taking over down the stretch in overtime. Boo Buie, another one of my favorite players in college basketball, is really made for moments like this, and we could see the Owls, who made the Final Four last year, have their season ended. But we are going to be taking our second break, and when we come back on the other side, we will be getting into the G League Ignite situation, how the NBA just announced they will not be renewing the program, and it will be done after this season. So stick with us, and we will be right back.